And we are live. Welcome, everybody. I know it's early in the day. It is noon, and I don't usually have hangouts this early. However, I have a special guest, Dave S., who actually lives in Britain, so I have to accommodate him. If you guys do not remember Dave S., then something's wrong with you. And if you've never been exposed to him, then you're in for a treat. And by the way, I don't mean exposed to him like he's going to expose himself, because that'd be wrong. That sounded a lot different in my head.
Out, Steve.
Yeah, that sounded a lot differently in my head. But anyways, Dave S goes way back. He's back in the old days when we used to hang out with like Nadia and just trash the crap out of Matt Slick and that whole clown car posse.
And
but
Matt
anyway,
Bell.
Matt Bell. Oh my goodness, I don't know what happened to him. Darwin's deity, but he's back now, and I'm reintroducing him to the community so he can get subs and start to do his thing again. Now, I have billed him as a philosophy guy. He's actually a psychology dude, but what's the difference? He's smart, and he knows how to pick apart arguments, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And we're going to allow you guys ask him questions about philosophy or psychology or just how to take apart arguments and various types of arguments, whether arguments you just want some more information on. And I also got Barney in here, who's also very good at taking apart arguments. So this might be some fun. But Dave, welcome back to the community, dude. Been a while.
Pleasure to be here.
So happy.
Oh, I'm grinning from ear to ear, as you can tell from my brilliant picture.
Yeah, well, you really enjoyed, I do remember very specifically, you really enjoyed showing people why people's arguments were so bad, especially when it came to Christian apologetics, and they've gotten worse. I think especially lately, most of the Christian apologists have really gotten to the bottom of the barrel apologetics.
I do think, and there is a sort of a related issue for me, is that this kind of, well, at least on our side, if you want to call it that, has matured as well. So when I think about the atheist experience or the big hitters back in the day with like Thunderfoot or Amazing Atheist, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it felt like we're all very new. So if you watch all Potholer's old videos, they're very, absolutely no disrespect, one of my absolute favorite channels, but very sort of base level or ground, very basal analysis of, okay, this is idiotic, this is wrong, this is fallacious, this is. Whereas now I feel like the argument has moved forward, and I think so. For example, when we're talking about prophecy, for example, if Matt Dillahunty brings up prophecy, it used to be very much his steak analogy about if I ask for a steak in a restaurant and they give it to me, is that a prophecy? Don't get me wrong, there's a merit to that, but I think everyone's moved the conversation forward to go, okay, so when it comes to prophecy, what is prophecy? Who were the prophets? And did Jesus fulfill any of the prophecies that are in the Jewish Bible? That's a more sophisticated and more intellectually rigorous answer than just, was it just written to confirm Jesus was the Messiah? So it seems like everyone's kind of matured, apart from Christians who seem to have regressed and just, I'm not listening. Because I think basically they're just being challenged on more fronts now. It's become more acceptable to challenge people. So we're all brushing up on things that we possibly didn't do back in the day, because it was very much, oh, look, there's a dinosaur DNA. That proves that the Earth is 6,000 years old and that dinosaurs were wandering around with people. Everyone is kind of, because we've attacked so mercilessly these ridiculous arguments, we've kind of gone, okay, we now have to move on to better arguments. So I don't know whether it's the Red Queen, that everything's moving so fast that apologists are getting left behind, or that everyone who's counter apologists, or what you want to call people who respond to these, have just upped their game, and that Christianity has just stayed still. I don't know if they're getting worse or we're just getting better. But either way, I think the
could be both, right? I mean, why
not both?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to agree with you. They are definitely getting worse, and we are definitely getting better, because I've seen the improvement over the years. And I think I've added to that a little bit. I like to think that I've added to the improvement. I get constantly people messaging me saying, Steve, I've learned so much from you over the years, or that you were instrumental in getting me interested in subjects that I had no experience with before. So that, to me, I think it's great. If they can use what I will explain to them why an argument's bad, and they can go to a theist or go to like a younger creationist and explain to them why something is bad, I think that my job is done at that point. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And like I say, you are as far as I'm concerned, you're spearheading what I think needs to be done, is sort of not just groundwork, but kind of bringing everyone up to this same level, so we can then have more productive conversations. Now, we were talking before about my ultimate sort of career aims, and hopefully if I achieve nothing else in my hopefully burgeoning career now, it's to actually move the conversation back 2 or 3 steps. So it's not, is Christianity reasonable? The questions I want to be asking is Christianity self-refuting? is Christianity, even a possibility is whether it's reasonable or not, let alone whether it's true, and is the concept of God coherent? These look like steps backwards, but for me, as someone who's interested in sort of counter apologetics, if that's a coherent concept, because apologetics is just giving a defense for something. But for me, I want to be asking those sort of questions, not, if the resurrection happened, does that mean Christianity is true? For me, it's a question of, for me, the answer to that is it's not immediately false. That's what Christianity stands and falls on, but then you need other things to happen, hence my last video about it. But it should be, is the concept of God coherent? So for the omnipotence paradox, for me, is still unresolved, that we don't have a coherent concept of God. So we'll probably get onto theological non-cognitivism a bit later, but I want to move the questions back, because I think Christians have had such an easy time that it's like, well, everyone knows what God is, so we can all just kind of say, well, Christianity, if you can't explain the empty tomb and the post-mortem appearances of Jesus, then Christianity is true. I want to move the question back to, okay, so pretend I'm an alien, I've never heard of God, explain to me what God is. And so I like holding people's feet to the fire. That's what I do. That's what I do best. I say, what argument can you present? And so can I break it down into the constituent elements and go, here's where I disagree. It's premise one, or the inference in premise one, or the justification for premise two, or both. And I think that's what you got to do. You got to break down, where exactly do I disagree? Because I think people forget that arguments aren't these sort of intrinsically intellectual endeavors in which we have to critically analyze each one. You can just say, for example, I always use this analogy, but if I say it takes 10 minutes to wash a car, then it takes an hour to wash 6. It's mathematically and axiomatically true. It's a very simple modus ponens, but you can go, okay, I can't reject the if P then Q, but I can reject P, so that it takes 10 minutes to wash a car. When you think of arguments in those terms, it's just a series of connected sentences, propositions, which are either true or reasonable to accept. And you go, okay, at what point do I reject that? And if you don't reject it, then you have to, under pain of contradiction or pain of internal inconsistency, you have to accept it. You have to accept, okay, well, I accept P and accept the consequence of P is Q, but I don't accept Q. That doesn't work. So that's what I try and do. I break down where in the argument do I disagree, and if I don't, then you have to accept it.
Yeah, I think that I am working on something along the lines to kind of contest ichtheism and theological non-cognitivism. They are different. Obviously, ichtheism would be the concept that the word God is not have any cognitive meaning; it's just a babble. And theological non-cognitivists would just say that the proposition of theism is not truth apt. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, I do think there is a subtle difference. Don't get me wrong, there is a difference, but I think it's one of those. I think there was a great video by TMM, Messianic Manic, or whatever he's going by now, which kind of explained it in sort of the simplest terms. I think about, and like I said, I think for me, it's about, at the end of the day, if a being knocked on my door tonight during this hangout and said, "I'm God," would I be able to recognize that being as a God? What would they have to do? What would they have to say? What would they have to produce? What miracles would they have to do? And my answer is, I don't know. Now, for me, that partly is because I'm not arrogant enough to assume that I would know what an omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, timeless, spaceless, immaterial being can do. I think that's quite arrogant to say that. But yeah, fundamentally, that for me is the bottom line. Atheism is to say, I don't believe that would even happen potentially, or that's a unlikely scenario. And then you have these sort of sort of offshoots from those. But basically, yeah, with Anti-Citizen X's video about omnipotence, that kind of encapsulates how I feel about omnipotence in particular. That someone turns up on your door and says to be omnipotent, can we actually coherently define that? And I would say, if we can, I'm okay with almighty, just the most powerful thing in existence, but omnipotence I think is very poorly.
So you reject things like the logical problem of evil and ontological arguments outright because of that? Or I mean, do you think the logical problem of evil is a good argument if you're willing to accept those omni traits?
For me, the problem of evil has never really been a problem for me. And I think the way that Christians, particularly like Frank Turek, tries to rebrand the problem of evil as it's not a problem at all, because if evil exists, or Ravi Zacharias is another one, the reason why it's not a problem is because in order to have evil, you must have good. In order to have good, you must have a lawmaker. And if you have a lawmaker...
I don't buy into that whole argument.
I think it's horseshit.
Yeah,
but
it's horseshit.
you know, for me, almost the problem of evil is almost the problem of ambivalence. That the universe is indifferent to us, not that there's good or evil. But I don't reject that. As for ontological arguments, I do reject. I reject the two different strands. I think people kind of put them all together as if they're one thing. But Plantinga's isn't actually an ontological argument. It's actually just an argument for the existence of any empirical claim.
Well, Plantinga, he'll posit you know, a thing against an evidential argument of evil. He has a theodicy against that. The problem is it doesn't really cover natural evils. But the way I look at a logical problem of evil, that's more of a consistency of the premises. For them all being true at the same time cannot happen. So there's an inconsistency in the logical system. That's why the logical problem of evil works so well against a very specific omni being, that all those properties, the omnibenevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient, cannot be all true simultaneously because of the existence of evil. But you have to accept that there's a God concept that really is talking about in order to run that logical problem of evil.
And I think, yeah, I think you touched upon an interesting point about the concept itself. For example, I can still meaningfully, and I think this is where I need to sort of round off.
This is where you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, isn't it?
Yeah, this is where I'm going to put my
I can tell already.
Well, but I think you can meaningfully talk about something that you don't believe and say, okay, I can't actually picture this, but okay, omnipotence means this, omnibenevolence means this, you know, all these things mean this. I don't know, it's a difficult one because I think you have to almost end up anthropomorphizing it, because at the end of the day, I then go, okay, I can't picture that. I'm thinking of a guy in the clouds that's really powerful, that loves us, etc. I can't picture a timeless, spaceless, immaterial mind. It's describing it in terms of what it's not to begin with. Like if I say my uncle doesn't have tentacles, doesn't wear a hat, and you know, doesn't have, you know, webbed fingers, I'm describing it in terms of what he's not. But you know what an uncle kind of looks like. But yeah, I think that the problem of evil, or the logical problem of evil, is it's a tool in the armory. It's a tool in the armory of the concept of God being incoherent as a whole. Whereas I think you can take one specific component and say, okay, omnipotence paradox, has that been resolved? And I would say it's only resolved if you use the definition inconsistently. But that's, you know, at the end of the day, that's what apologetics is built on. It's built on equivocations of omnipotence means able to do everything logically possible, but at the same time, creating a rock so heavy that it cannot be lifted by its maker is logically possible, but it's logically impossible if you can create. And this is what my video was trying to show, responding to Derez. It was literally the hidden assumption with that is that there is a definition of omnipotence which implies such a being can lift all rocks they have created, which it doesn't. And so what you have to do is say, okay, well, your concept of God, it's not meaningful to me. Explain to me it's meaningful to me. And we'll get onto like theories of truth and knowledge, when we need to be on the same page. If you say God and I say God, we need to make sure we're talking about the same thing. In the same way, if I talk about my uncle and you're thinking about your uncle, it doesn't work. So we need to make sure we're on the same page. And that's hopefully what...
I think that a whole hangout can be dedicated just to that, actually.
Oh, yes.
Because, you know, I look at it as more of the whole, can God lift something, make something so heavy, can it lift it, is more asking a posited, all-powerful being to fail, which I think doesn't make much sense. And that was the principle of eternal verities, right? That was the theists that posited that, because they wanted to see, hey, if I have an all-powerful being, can he like cease to be? And of course, you know, no theist is going to say God can cease to be, even by his own will. So they had to throw in some other things like being logically consistent with his own nature and all that other stuff. So, I mean, I run the arguments as they posited. So if they say, you know, here's my understanding of an omnipotent being logically consistent and all this other stuff, then I think it doesn't make sense to ask if God can make a rock so heavy he can lift, because you're asking him to fail, which by definition he can't. But anyways, this is Ask Dave Anything, and people in the live chat going nuts.
I've just
more
seen
people watching than I had told you we would. So
yeah, this is scary. Hi guys.
Now he only has about an hour, guys, because he is in you know, Britain, and on a flat Earth, you know, the sun disappears there or something. Like, I don't know how it works.
It works like that somehow.
Yeah, I don't know. Are you hanging on? No, that's Australians. You're still in the upper, you know, hemisphere for me, so you're not hanging on for dear life.
No,
right?
No, not quite. No.
Okay, so there's some questions in the live chat. Let's get those first, and then Barney, if you want to ask some questions. Let's see here. First question: is Dave a moral realist? If not, what does he think of the arguments in support of moral realism? That's a whole different topic altogether. But let's get into that for a few here, Dave, because I love this topic. You know that, so.
Oh yes, it's a fascinating topic, and I did do a video about the three different types of morality or moral ethics. So you have moral realism, which is basically there is no difference between moral facts like stealing is wrong and world we live in, empirical facts. So the sky is blue. Moral realism is they're in the same category. They're both either true or false, depending on whether it's true or not. So the sky is blue and stealing is wrong. They're both moral facts, and you can affirm them as such. They're truth. They can be assigned a truth value. Moral anti-realism is a bit of an interwoven web because it depends on whether you think they're mistaken objective claims. So they're subjective. So they are true, but it's a subjective assessment. That they're not genuine truth claims at all. So it can be non-cognitivist, or the denial that they exist altogether. So that's like moral nihilism or moral skepticism. Then you have what I think is not the halfway house, but kind of somewhere in between you when you go, okay, well, we can talk meaningful about, stealing is wrong. We can talk linguistically as if it's true or not, even though it's in a different category. And that's probably where I would most likely stand at the moment. I'm trying to still work this through. But quasi-realism. So basically that we can say, okay, we both know that what it means to say stealing is wrong, but is that in the same category as the sky is blue? And I would say, well, we can talk in the same way about the sky being blue and stealing is wrong, even though there are no ethical facts for them to correspond to. So that's probably where I'd say I'm not a moral realist in that sense. So the analogy I always think about when it comes to moral realism is to say, okay, so the speed limit outside my house, there's a sign right there that says 30 miles an hour. Okay, so if everyone was speeding, if everyone's doing 35 or 40 miles an hour, would that be wrong? Would that be violating that law that it says 30 miles an hour? The answer is yes. So if everyone was doing something, it would still be wrong. Then the question is, okay, if no humans exist, if humans just were wiped off the planet, would it still be wrong? And if you answer yes, you're probably a moral realist to say it's independent of people, it's objective, it's not mind dependent. If you hold to anti-realism, you'd say no, it's not. Quasi-realism is to say, well, it's not meaningful to talk about it because there's no, in this case, sapient or sentient beings.
Yeah, we're more. I always say we're agents of moral consideration.
And yeah, so I think it's the arguments for moral realism. I think are a little bit. I think they assume a bit too much, and I think for me the problem I have with moral realism is that there seems to be a lack of moral sort of progress. So I don't think you can have progress. So we're more moral now than we were before with moral realism. I think you have to sort of borrow from forms of relativism almost to say, okay, well, we're more moral now than we were, but does that mean that it was moral before and we just didn't know about it? And then you have to get into moral epistemology. How do we know when things are right and wrong?
Well,
I think.
Oh, sorry.
If I can just butt in for a second.
Yeah.
There is one part that I'm kind of confused about between quasi-realism and realism. When you say that stealing is wrong is a fact on the same scale as the sky is blue, I would say that both those statements are circumstance dependent, right? So stealing is wrong if you are a human living on Earth at this day and age due to biological and social pressures and consequence. And the sky is blue if you're standing on Earth during the day and the sky is cloudless, right? And if you accept that kind of setting the brackets on under which conditions a statement is true, then I would say that I'm a realist. However, if you can point out a difference between those two that I'm kind of oblivious of, then I would guess that I'm a quasi-realist, because then there is no underlying fact of truth.
Well, let's kind of suss that out a little bit for people, because whenever you're talking about moral context and moral talk, it gets confusing very, very, very quickly and gets bogged down in nuances. And a lot of even people in the literature use these words differently, and it's kind of disconcerting. I do agree very strongly there's a difference between moral ontology and moral epistemology. So there's a difference between what we should do and how do we know what is moral and what's not. But I think the confusion is meta ethics from normative ethics. And so would you agree, Dave, that if you're talking about what you should do in a given situation, why bother with meta ethics? You need to go to normative ethics, because normative ethics is what you're going to tell you to do ethically, right? I mean, I look at it more this way. And I'm going to use an analogy that actually was in a book written suggested to me by, I think it was Darwin's Greatest Hits that I was reading, that if you're watching a football game, then the referees would be the normative according to the rules and what you have to do to play according to the rules of the game, like deontology. And then the commentators or the pundits or the announcers, they have no say in the game itself. They're just announcing it and have a higher epistemic vantage point, looking in and going, okay, what's going on here? And I think the meta ethicists kind of do that. So the meta ethics, the way I would look at it, is first, do you agree that an objectivist and a subjectivist both agree there are moral facts? It just one believes that it's independent of a mind and not contingent upon an individual, would be the objectivist, but a subjectivist would say, there are moral facts, but they're contingent upon an individual. Would you say that's a kind of a true story, a true statement?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And people, there are more nuance to that, like say moral skepticism.
I'm getting really simple here, by the way. Yeah,
broadest possible broad stroke. If you want to say there's objective and subjective moral positions, simplest possible terms, whether it's mind dependent or would be true or false, depending on independent of whether humans existed. So without human say so. So absolutely, that's
okay.
a good. I also like the analogy as well. It's a really good analogy. Which
it was a great analogy. It's called Fundamentals of Metaethics, I think was the book. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pages I can't get to, so I'm trying to find a better copy because I hate when you want to get a preview and you have to skip like 40 pages. It's like,
especially when the next sentence is the key one.
Yeah, exactly. And it happens frequently. I think they go out of their way to do that. It's like, we're going to tease you, so you have to like buy the book or something.
Like a clickbait type.
Yeah, exactly. So okay. So if that's the case, then let me ask you, why do you think so many people, whether it be atheists or theists, care so much whether morals are objective or subjective? Because I got to tell you, I don't think it fucking matters. I just honestly don't. I think if people are going to be talking about the moral context of things, they should be talking about normativity and deontological or virtue ethics or consequentialism, because that's what I want to know. I want to know what a person's going to do in a moral situation. I don't care if a proposition is so much even truth apt. I don't even care if you're a non-cognitivist or a cognitivist when it comes to moral propositions, so much as I want to know if you're a moral person. And so why are they fixated so much on this whole objective subjective dichotomy, which I don't even think is even an actual dichotomy? I think there's so much overlap that it's not a binary thing. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, fundamentally, absolutely right. I think because I did a video responding to Bible Humping Wingnut and Skylar Fiction's classic, because basically the bottom line is, I think alluded to it there, is the problem with objective morality is that it's not subjective, and the problem with subjective morality is that it's not objective. That seems to be what they were saying. That Skylar was saying, the problem with you, Tim, is that you're saying it's independent of human well-being. It's independent of human feelings, thoughts, wishes, wants, desires, all those things. And then Tim was saying to Skylar, well, yours is only dependent on those. It's not objective. And that's where the argument just sort of went round and round in circles. And so for me, you talking about morality independent of human well-being, human flourishing, whatever you want to call it. Morality, it's a contradiction in terms to say, I'm going to talk about something that's moral or immoral, and it can hurt people. That for me is a contradiction. So whether morality is objective or subjective, like you say, you should be talking about a given action in a given situation, or in situations as a whole, what is the best course of action. You do have to then touch upon meta-ethics but then we don't even agree on what right and wrong is. You have people in this world who think the best thing in the world is, martyrdom or radicalization, and then this sort of global jihad or whatever. So you have people who love death more than you and I love life. So I think for me, I'm just going to say, I'm going to let bygones be bygones and let those people do their thing, as long as they don't live in this same, unfortunately, I'm glad that a lot of people in my country and most people watching live in a country where that isn't the majority position. But I'm more interested in, okay, boots on the ground, when the rubber hits the road, is this given action moral or not? So is giving gay people the right to marry, is that moral or immoral? Is LGBTQ plus, whatever it's called now, I don't know what the latest term is,
LBGQ, P, F, G, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3.
That face, Batman symbol, that one.
So why do they appeal to meta-ethics for that, though? That's the weirdest thing that I try to get across to people that I do not understand. I have people tell me, well, how can you say what's right or wrong if you're not a moral objectivist? Because that has nothing to do with me saying something is wrong. I could, okay, hypothetically, I'm not, but hypothetically, let's say that I'm a cognitivist, I'm a subjectivist. I can say, hey, Barney, I think what you're doing is wrong. And I can appeal to some kind of normative ethical theory to explain why. I don't need to appeal to moral objectivism to have morals.
Yeah, and I think that's the greatest sort of victory for Christian apologists, that they kind of they word it in such a way, that they put it in such a way that it's like atheists and non-theists or non-Christians aren't even allowed to sit at the same table because they're not objectivists. And you can say, look, and this is why I'm a massive advocate for fictionalism, which if we get onto the tag, I'll explain in more detail. But basically, fictionalism is basically saying, okay, so I'll briefly explain. So fictionalism is basically saying, well, in the context of the tag, it's slightly different, but it's basically saying we can talk meaningfully about a proposition, a worldview, whatever, something that you don't hold, in order to either perform a reductio ad absurdum, which is what I do in the tag, or to basically talk meaningfully and say, okay, I'm not an objectivist, but let's say I am, and then do an internal critique. So you then say, I'm going to take the assumptions of this in order to critique it and say, I'm going to jump into your worldview. Now, that's kind of how it works. It works slightly different when I use it for the tag, but
sure. There's different variations of fictionalism.
Yes.
Too. So, okay, let me ask you this then. Oh God, there's so many different rabbit holes. He only has an hour. We could spend literally, Dave and I could probably talk like 10 hours just on this stuff. It's ridiculous. I love this topic.
10 hours a day for every day for the rest of our lives.
It's a fascinating topic, and it's good. I love when I have somebody who actually knows about this that I can learn from, because I'm so tired of people making statements, and I know they've never opened a book on metaethics. I know they've never read anything on the topic. For example, if you heard somebody say objective morality is impossible, would you say that person has an obligation or an onus of some kind to prove by reductio that is the case?
I'm a bit pernickety. I've had people disagree with me in the past of how pernickety I am. So, for example, when Ronnie back in the day was saying point out a fallacy in my video, and I was like, well, you need an argument for that. And I got a lot of heat from people saying, you don't need an argument. It's like, well, fallacy is a very specific word, and formal fallacies necessarily require an argument because it's do the premises lead to the conclusion. Mm-hmm. So if you say impossible, it has the same baggage. So if you say impossible as in not, it depends on what you mean by impossible.
Show that, correct?
Absolutely. So you do need to say it is not, either metaphysically, physically, or logically impossible. Now, I think there's a bit of a red herring there. Like, I think physical possibility and logical possibility, I don't think they're a subset, but that's a different issue. So when you say something is impossible, I think you have the onus to prove it is not possible. And again, this links nicely to the tag with, can you prove something is impossible by just going through, well, I've asked 10 atheists to provide a justification for moral subjectivity and they haven't. That isn't proving something's impossible, just that it's not been done yet.
Right, no, I agree with you on that. I use the same analogy when people say you can't have something come from nothing, or from nothing comes. I think they have an onus to prove that using a reductio, because you're saying that it is impossible for something to come from nothing. That is a claim. When people say objective morality is impossible, that is a claim. You can't just throw stuff out there and expect to not be challenged on that, because I have never, and let me ask you this, you've read a lot about this topic. Have you ever seen a formalized proof that objective morality is impossible?
No, never.
Right. Never. Now, people can argue it doesn't exist. That's a different argument, though.
Absolutely, yeah. In the same way, if I say, well, I've never seen a black swan, it's the same reasoning. But with the topic of something from nothing, just as Dave's tip for the day, if Frank Jurek, if someone comes up to you and says, prove to me that something can come from nothing, just ask them a question, what's stopping something coming from nothing?
Nothing. That's a problem. There's no properties to even deal with. So, because if you're saying something can't come from nothing, you're assigning properties to it when we don't even know what the hell the properties of nothing are, if it even has properties, because it probably wouldn't even have anything. There's nothing stopping something from coming from nothing as much as there's nothing stopping from nothing come from nothing. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. So
it works both ways. But but you know how much shit I get for explaining that to people and they don't get it?
Oh, absolutely. Because then you're saying, well, and then you get into the William Lane Craig. Well, why doesn't a horse just appear in the
Well, he's just a contrarian. All he does is just spew stuff for his sheep. He doesn't care whether it's true or not. He just wants to win votes for his debates. That's all.
Oh, absolutely.
He wants to get a crowd on his side, right?
Yeah. And like I say, I think what is interesting here, we kind of merged the topic of picking up on the moral thing as well as something coming from nothing and causation in the Kalam and so on. It's very difficult, or it takes a lot longer to explain something that's counterintuitive. So it's counterintuitive to think that something can come from nothing, or it's not logically impossible, or that you can have because it feels like morality exists. And that's the ironic thing.
It's a veridical type paradox. It's something that kind of feels wrong, but there's nothing in logic and nothing in philosophy that says something can't come from nothing.
Absolutely.
Say something can't come from nothing requires an actual formal logical reductio ad absurdum of some kind.
Yeah, and that's true for everything in the same way. Like I say,
I absolutely agree with you. Yes, thank you. It's about time somebody like came on that, because it's again, I get a lot of people that are like, Steve, you're wrong, and I'm like, well, how am I wrong on this? It just seems intuitive to me that if you say something is impossible, logically impossible, you need to prove it.
Yeah, and some things are sort of more
not physically impossible. There's a difference to me.
Yes. Well, I think there is a subset, because I think for me, saying something's physically impossible kind of ties into logical possibilities of violating one's nature, I think is logically impossible. But anyway, that's a slight side, but that's another whole different rabbit hole. But yes, just tying up the something from nothing, and if you say something is impossible, I can say I'm a bit of a stickler. I'm a bit anal when it comes to wording of things. So if you say, I want someone to point out a fallacy in this video, I would expect someone to turn around and say, you didn't present an argument, as in premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, conclusion, because that formal fallacy means affirming the conjunct, or I can't think of any other formal fallacies, but you know what I mean. So you can have formal fallacies of whereas informal fallacies,
affirming the consequent,
yeah, exactly,
that kind of stuff.
Mine went completely blank there. But
so, okay, real quick, would you agree? And I don't mean to derail you, but I'm trying to like read the live chat at the same time. Would you agree though? If somebody says like got a spaghetti, cool guy in the live chat, he said, because nothing is always something. To me, that's a reification fallacy.
Yeah, you can't treat nothing as if it is something.
Right? Would you not agree that's hyperstantiation, or literally a fallacy of reification?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't treat I've got a box of nothing. Yeah. That's not what that means. I think Alex Malpass has done a great blog about that. I think it's
he does great blog and everything.
A great blog on it. Alex Malpass. Blog.
He's literally a god among men when it comes to these types of things.
Yeah, so he's an absolute great a communicator, explaining these very complicated things in very simple ways that even I can understand. So yeah, so you can't treat.
Not always. Like, no, I'm going to disagree with you on that. Not always. There's some of his. I mean, I read every blog post I think he probably had. There's some that are just, dude, you got to tone this down a little bit, because I had to read like 6 times to figure it out. Even then, I was like, I give up.
To be
fair,
I think
very rare, but yeah, he can be very nuanced sometimes. But yeah, he's great at communicating at things, though.
But is that type of concept of nothing even meaningful anywhere else except in philosophy?
Probably not.
No, it's same with like mathematics. When you get to pure mathematics that don't correspond to anything that if you say like a googolplex, we are never going to have in our universe a googolplex of anything. Well,
that's nothing now compared to like Graham's numbers and stuff, and arrow notation. Yeah,
I know, but a googolplex is a number. It's a quantity. It is something that we have
very high number.
Many examples of, and we can.
But there are much higher numbers.
Those examples, and then extrapolate how they would behave in greater quantities or in different. For nothing, there is literally nothing analogous. Merely saying that it is the opposite of something is practically a non-concept, right? Something can never. What?
I was going to say, it just makes your head hurt. Like trying to think about nothing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if somebody can conceptualize it or not. I have no idea, but I could just tell you that. Again, when somebody just makes that claim, something can't come from nothing, that requires evidence. That requires a proof. And people are so unwilling to challenge people on that. It is accepted by fiat, and I don't get that.
I think the trouble is because it's very intuitive to say, well, we have like literally every single thing that we see in the world. So if I do anything now or look at anything now, every single example is something coming from something. And the same way when we have the white swan or black swan analogy.
I was going to say no black swan. That's exactly what I was going to say.
It's intuitive in the sense of if I was teleported right now into Times Square and I say everyone I encounter is I don't know, can walk or whatever it is, there's something that they can all do. Or if I get teleported to the Bugsy Malone set and say this entire place is populated by kids, therefore only children exist in the world, it's intuitive because at the end of the day we as humans we draw upon the experience of our immediate vicinity. philosophy is a very recent invention in human, evolution or in the history of the world, because we have time to sit around and, shoot the shit about questions about these that don't correspond to anything like pure mathematics, like the concept of nothing.
Right.
But it's in the realm of philosophy and mathematics that we can pontificate about things, whereas even a few hundred years ago, let alone a few thousand or 10,000 years ago, I was looking over my shoulder for a saber-toothed tiger, trying to eat my face. So it's only this, and I think we have this sort of genome lag, that we have this, we're not evolved to deal with sort of civilization. I think the concept of justice is quite a primitive one, that our concept of, everything is very so primitive, because we still have the same brains that we had in the savannah, trying not to get eaten by, saber-toothed tigers and whatever, or if you're an earth creationist, dinosaurs. And so we haven't had our brains adjusted to this civilization of living in houses, going to supermarkets, shopping online and doing these things. Our brains are still, don't like bad things, like sweet things, like sugary things, like fatty things, etc. When it comes to justice and so on, our brains just haven't caught up with our changing society and technology as well. And
Sure.
I think that's why philosophy is, we're still in our infancy when it comes to philosophy, and I don't know what the limit is. That's a philosophical question in itself, but it's very easy to argue from things in our experience, like when something bad happened to me, I felt like I was wronged, so there must be something more to it. Love must be something more than just oxytocin, etc.
I think we have intuitional type things. I think we have gut instinct going, something doesn't feel right here. We want to be able to explain this. But what's funny is, like, we just literally explained things like the reification fallacy, and somebody would be like, there is nothing is a contradiction. No, it's not a contradiction. There's nothing there's no contradiction in saying there is nothing, because what's the contradiction? A contradiction is two statements that can't be true at the same time. That's all.
Oh yeah, I think, and this is possibly another tangent. So correct me if if I'm steering way off topic.
Well, welcome to Google Hangouts. Like we don't.
But I do sort of cringe whenever I hear particularly non-Christian, well, entirely non-Christians talking about there's a contradiction in the Bible. I don't like that word, because a contradiction means the Gospel of Luke says Jesus went to the supermarket at 2:30. Then the gospel, it doesn't say that. Don't check it anywhere. But the Gospel of Matthew says Jesus didn't go to the supermarket at 2:30 on the same day, in the same time, in the same sense. They're contradictions. They are things that cannot both simultaneously be true in the same time and respect. But saying Jesus went to the supermarket and one saying Jesus went to the adult bookshop, that's not a contradiction. That's just an inconsistency. It's not reporting the same details, but they can both be true. He could have gone to one place or the other, or that could be a subset of the supermarket.
Oh, absolutely, I agree with you. Yeah.
But
all right, let me give you a contradiction. To me, I think there are contradictions in the Bible, but I think a lot of people attribute contradictions that are not contradictions. But like a contradiction to me would be something like where it talks about a king, Isaiah, I think it's the name. In one passage, he's 22 when he starts his reign, and one passage is 42. Those cannot be true at the same time. That's a true contradiction, but that they even admit was a scribal error.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think in the same way, if you read Paul's account of what happened after his Damascus Road experience, and then you read the book of Acts, they can't both be true. One says he carried on to Damascus like he was planning to. The book of Acts says, nope, turned around, went back to Jerusalem and did that. He can't have done both at the same time. And so what I would say is Acts tried to then reconcile Paul with the Jerusalem movement, but that's another issue for itself. But yeah, it's a contradiction to say, after this experience, I went straight to Damascus, or I went to Jerusalem. They can't both be true. Right. I think he went to Damascus, then Jerusalem. That would be you can harmonize them. I'm not saying it's impossible to. The question is, well, why did one of them say one thing and one say the other? And I had a good hangout with Rich, Abominable History Man, historian, PhD, incredible guy. Subscribe to his channel, everyone. And we were talking about even if you believe that the Bible is inerrant, you still have to believe there are different authors that were putting things forward. You may be able to harmonize every single thing in the Bible. I don't think you can, but you may be able to. Let's assume you can. Why does, for example, the Gospel of John say that Jesus was crucified a day earlier than the Synoptic Gospels? So there is a reason for it. It's a theological reason, because he has him as the Paschal Lamb, which is an Exodus tradition, and they're slaughtered on the 14th of Nishan. The Synoptic Gospels don't have him as the Paschal Lamb, so he's not the sacrifice. So the Passover. So slaughter the lamb and put the blood on the doorstops. That's what that comes from. Because they don't have that theology, they can go, no, he's slaughtered on the 15th. So you can say, well, John just had this theological narrative that he wanted to play out, so he has this occurring on a different day. Now, granted, then you go, well, if we accept John made shit up that wasn't true, why do we then believe Mark? And that's kind of what I'm doing with my first paper at the moment, is about a radical new hypothesis about the historicity of the resurrection. And so, well, if John made shit up that didn't happen and says things that didn't happen that no other gospel records, why can't we say the same thing about Mark? So I'm going to leave that a bit of cliffhanger.
You need to get with Dr. Griffith and Dr. Bowen. You guys would have like fun getting into those really myopic details of sorts. But I think I should just point out that there is a difference, correct, between inerrant and infallible. The way I look at inerrant is just that there are no errors in the Bible. That would be an inerrancy. But infallible, which is a much stronger claim, when people say that the Bible's infallible, it cannot be wrong.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. It's not just there are no errors; it cannot have errors.
Which I think both of them are kind of bullshit. But
they're both horseshit. But there is a difference.
There's a difference, distinct difference. People are still wondering about the whole something from nothing. Maybe you can do a video on it. I don't understand. Maybe I'm not communicating it well enough for them to understand it. But I think it's completely cognitively meaningful to say, can something come from nothing? I think that's a meaningful question. So the concept of nothing, to me, philosophically has meaning, right? It's just that in order to say something cannot come from nothing, whatever philosophical nothing is, which I would say would be the absence of everything, you have to show that. That's the only thing I'm saying, is you have to logically prove that. That's all.
Yeah, and just the broader point is that if you say something is impossible, these are just examples of impossible things. If I say I'm unbeatable at arm wrestling, it's impossible for someone to beat me arm wrestling. I can't just say, well, 10 people or everyone in the world, even if we say every single person in the world hasn't beaten me, you can't then leap to say, well, I'm unbeatable. It's just I'm unbeaten. Mm-hmm. So it's the inductive fallacy. You need the strength of a deductive argument when you're offering an inductive argument. Now you can change an inductive to a deductive argument relatively straightforwardly, i.e., if every instance of X is the case, then it is true that every case will be that. So if I say, okay, every swan I've seen is white, therefore all swans are white, you can easily change that to a deductive argument. It's not very difficult to say, well, if every one I've experienced is the grand total of all the swans, then by definition they must be. So, but you can't have the strength of every day I've walked past my neighbour's dog and it hasn't bitten me, therefore he cannot bite me. It's impossible for him to bite me. Most people would recognise, well, no, that's making a hasty generalisation. It's something has not happened to cannot happen. There's a difference there.
So the analogy here would be that just because we have never seen something come from nothing doesn't mean the same as implying or inferring that something can't come from nothing. There's two different.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just an example of saying, if you say something's possible, you need to prove it. Whereas you can say something's possible by saying you need to show it, unless it is impossible. We can. I mean, people might say that's an argument from ignorance, but I think to say something's possible is not to say a lot. To say it just means there's no contradiction. And if there's no contradiction, it may be, incredibly unlikely for something to happen, but people might challenge it on the argument of ignorance.
I hold things to generally be possible unless it's been demonstrated to be logically impossible, or if you want to go the physical route, like we had this discussion the other day, and I'll get your input on it, about people rising from the dead. Now, my argument was pretty simple, and again, you think my reasoning is pretty good. You've said so. Follow my reasoning on this and tell me what you think of this. My argument was this: it is obviously biologically and physically impossible for someone to come back from the dead, in my opinion, right? But it's not logically impossible, and those are two different types of claims.
Absolutely, yeah. It's to say, in the same way, the existence of unicorns. It's there may be no such thing as a unicorn, but that's not because it's logically impossible for them to exist. It's not. If you say, and this is where you get into like the invisible pink unicorn, you could say you're a non-cognitivist. You can't picture something that's invisible and also pink. You could say that's a contradiction, and say, well, pink is a visible light on the spectrum. Invisible means not visible light. Or you could say, well, they physically cannot, well, they logically cannot exist because there's two incompatible, in the same way, married bachelor or square triangle or
but those are more by analytical definition, though. I mean, I see your point, but I think there's a distinction to be made between something that's impossible by analytical distinction and definition than something that has an internal inconsistency by having contradictions.
But the thing is, I think with the way I sort of ended my last video about the omnipotence paradox is you can actually. This analytic synthetic distinction is it's not fluid, but there's kind of
it's flawed
degrees. But it's sort of, if I say a flightless bird can flap its wings to fly, it's an analytic proposition in the sense of it's impossible for a flightless bird to fly. Okay, that's what flightless means. And then just say, X is a flightless bird, so an ostrich or a penguin or whatever. So this is for me where I'm still kind of, again, rounding off the edges of, is it just the case of any analytic proposition is, for example, any X can do Y, and it's just what do we put in as X and Y? So a being which can lift every single rock they have created cannot create a rock so heavy they can't lift it. It's just whether then there is a concept which corresponds to that in the same way, or with anything. It's a case of this analytic distinction, analytic synthetic. I think there is a difference between analytic and synthetic propositions, but we can start off with an analytic proposition saying a flightless entity is anything which cannot fly using any sort of physical propulsion, whatever you want to call it. And then for example, a flightless bird is something that has the characteristics of a bird which cannot flap its wings to fly. And then a penguin is an example of that. And then is it logically impossible, physically impossible, metaphysically impossible? And I think it's logically impossible to violate one's nature. So if it's your nature to be flightless, can a kind of flightless thing fly? For me, is a contradiction. But then is that the same category as a married bachelor or someone who has the property of being a bachelor being married? This is where it gets a bit interesting. And this is where I'm still working out in my own head, because I think some philosophers like Quine don't think this is very simple, like saying water freezes at 0 degrees. That's kind of neither analytic nor synthetic. It's kind of both, but neither at the same time. It's kind of more nuanced than, okay, you have analytic propositions which are true by definition and synthetic propositions which aren't. You have to know something about the world. You need to know something about the world with both. So I'm throwing ideas out there. I'm not saying I've solved this issue.
Well, but also, isn't there a lot of confusion when you bring in like Kant's a priori synthetic views?
Absolutely, yeah. That's
where it gets really. That's where I think it jumps the shark. So.
Well, yeah, I do think, but basically, yeah, just
because that gets confusing. I mean, because correct me if I'm wrong, but Kant and a few other they use these terms differently than what a modern analytical philosopher would use.
Yes, I've not got it down here, but I've got a book of David Hume's collected essays, and it is. I mean, he was Scottish first of all, so it's not nothing against Scottish people, but it was a different language.
I'm watching. I'm Scottish.
Yeah, I know. They're just.
I'm Scots-Irish.
I mean,
my name is McCoy. How much Scots-Irish can I get?
Yeah. So and it's so the way he uses terms like passions is something we don't really talk about now when he talks about morality. So we have to sort of get in the mindset of David Hume when you read it, and I think that's the problem with language. The word William Shakespeare. You know, if you read Shakespeare, it makes fucking absolutely no sense now because you need to get the inside jokes, and we don't with the modern reading. Even if you do, literally translate it into modern English, you miss the nuance.
Exegete it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people think that word is a dirty word. It means
no, it's just contextual criticism, right? I mean,
absolutely. So, for example, my favorite one is oh god, which is well, Much Ado About Nothing sounds like an innocuous title. When you realise nothing actually was a pun for sex, so it's Much Ado About Sex. And if you read the play, or watched the play, or read it, that's what it's about. It's much. It's about
petite death meant orgasm.
Yep, and you have quaint. Quaint is actually the C word. I don't know if people want me to drop the C word, but that's so your quaint honor. You can probably work out what that means about chastity and so on.
Oh, there's a lot of sexual overtones in Shakespeare, to say the least, and a lot of inside jokes that was probably back then weren't so inside. They're probably more ubiquitous. But today's student, you have to like even simple things like wherefore art thou Romeo, means a lot different than what people think.
Oh yeah, it doesn't mean where are you. It means why are you an opponent, an antagonist of my family.
Yep,
not
exactly.
Where the fuck are you?
Not where, it's why, which is interesting. Oh my goodness, this is going by way too fast, dude. We have got to have a part 2 on this because I'm enjoying this, and we're going to be running out of time here, so we got to get more questions in. But damn, this is fun as frick, man. I love this. Real quick, while I got you here. So I ran this argument on the GDC the other night, and I sent it to you. About the whole weak, not to go too much into the atheism thing, but the whole weak atheism equals agnosticism equals weak theism. So you think that was a pretty decent argument? Now, again, you got to remember, I'm not formally trained in logic, right? So, I mean, I could probably read a little bit about predicate logic and understand somewhat, but writing it for me is very difficult I don't write in formal logic. I write in a bastardization between like actual logic and natural language, but I think it communicates the point. That's all I'm going for as a layperson. So with my proof that I had, if you take into account the fact that I am a layperson and I'm just writing in a kind of a natural language combined with logic, it made sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the thing is when you get the basics right. So for example, once you know what modus ponens, modus tollens, once you kind of understand that and you understand that you shouldn't, affirm the disjoint, you shouldn't do, if P then Q, Q therefore P, that kind of thing. Once you get beyond that, it's a steep learning curve after that, and I'm still working my way up it. The actual specific argument, like I say, and this is I've got in trouble in the past. This is an inside joke with me and my fiance. I've had a problem in the past by using or talking about operationally defining something. Talking about you can operationally define, for example, if I'm interested in whether cause aggression, you have to then define aggression. What do I mean by aggression? If I'm talking about aggression, do I mean physical assault? Do I mean emotional abuse? Do I mean the amount of wars that are committed? So as long as you make it clear that when I say aggression, I mean X. I mean the amount of instances of assault on a Friday night in London, in a London nightclub. You can say, okay, so if I increase the air conditioning on a particular night, is there more acts of assault in that nightclub than somewhere else? You can't then turn around and say, that's not aggression. You're saying, I'm operationally defining. I'm defining it in a strict sense, and that's what I mean. So your argument, I think, if you define agnosticism in the way that you do, it follows perfectly. You can then challenge the definition, as you can do with anything. You can say, okay, so I'm going to define God as, my microphone. You're obviously hearing me, so obviously God exists. You then go, well, your definition of God is pretty shit. God isn't a microphone. You can challenge it on that. But if you operationally define it and say, well, as long as we both agree that God is this microphone, then yes, God exists. Brilliant. Oh, amazing. In the same way, if you define it as a being which cannot not exist, you must,
No, I totally agree. Totally agree. And I think that, and by the way, you were right. The people that have read it, that know logic and reason, have said that as worded, it makes sense and it's legit. But I have people that are questioning the definitions, right? They're like, well, we use this definition. I'm like, then you're not actually giving a rebuttal to the argument.
Exactly. Yeah. In the same way, if I say, well, how many different denominations of Christianity are there, and say, well, I can disprove Christianity by this, or say the Catholic doctrine of the virgin birth. So you can say, well, I don't believe in that. It's like, well, I'm not talking about you then. If I say, I hate all people who do something. I don't know. I don't want to pick anyone out. But if I say I hate people who do this, and you go, oh, that's so harsh. It's like, you're not doing that. So why are you offended by that? And this is, that's not a great analogy. But if I'm not talking about you, then if you say, okay, your argument follows, it's valid. It's and then when you get into definitions, it's like, can you have a sound argument for an analytic, definition-y thing?
Sure.
That's a different kettle of fish. But you can say the reasoning is perfectly valid. That it follows from if you accept the definitions and you accept the conclusion.
Now, would you say that my definitions are consistent along the lines of what you would find? Now, exception with the weak theism, obviously, I had to mirror that. But the other definitions, would you say that's consistent in the peer review literature, in philosophy, and that's ubiquitously taught academically?
I don't see it. It doesn't stand out like a sore thumb. I think you might get pushback about agnosticism because you might have Puritans who think it is like the Thomas Huxley.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say I have had a few Huxley and look at it, and they're of course pure in that, and they're going to be adhering to the Huxley, the version of it. And I try to explain to them, I'm not a Huxleyan agnostic. I don't adhere to that. I understand it, but I'm a temporal agnostic. So that's still though changing the whole argument by them trying to redefine agnosticism. But the way I find agnosticism, I'm using SEP.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So I think that I'm perfectly fine to define. Now, again, I think there's multiple ways to define things and have the same results, right? If I say that agnosticism is a state of being agnostic on a proposition, that's the same as saying, well, you're not choosing a truth value or a false value for the proposition. They're the same things. They're equivalent statements in some degree. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And so, like I say, with your argument, like I say, you will always get people challenging definitions. And so if you say, okay, given the premises, or given the parameter of the argument, if you're not talking about literal premises, about literal like definitions of terms, you can say, as long as you grant, and like I say, you can challenge the definition of anything. That's the thing. Like, hence why people are still arguing about nothing in the chat.
Trivial, though. I mean, anybody can do that, and that doesn't take much work to challenge a definition. I want people to challenge the argument.
Yeah, and so as far as I'm concerned with the argument, absolutely no problems. I don't see any reason to say premise 1 doesn't connect with premise 2, or premise 3 is a non sequitur, or whatever. I think fundamentally, yeah, the reasoning is perfectly fine. It's just whether, like I say, as far as I'm concerned, if that is a modern usage in the same way, I don't like the word, and I don't like bringing it up, but paedophile. A lot of people use the word paedophile wrong. Yeah, they mean child molester. Paedophile just means lover of
right.
child.
No, I get you. I mean, that is true, by the way. But certain words I don't mind a little bit abusive, but obviously that I think that anybody that abuses a child, or not, because pedophilia is just the predilection, right? But not the actual. They don't have to actually act upon it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I understand the distinction there, and a lot of these words are used bastardized a little bit, but as long as I know what they mean, I don't really care about that. But
absolutely. And so your argument is kind of like that. It's sort of, you'll always get people who go, actually, no, it can't be that, because it's, paedophile actually means that. You can challenge it on the basis of that and say you have the Puritan go, or pathetic. Well, my favorite word is pathetic. Pathetic doesn't mean what most people use it as. It means deserving of sympathy. You are worthy of sympathy, so you're a pathetic character.
Same with like envy and jealousy, they get that confused.
Absolutely, yeah. So you can get
irony. They get that word wrong too.
Oh yeah, Alanis Morissette does not understand that. Well,
no, I know. I love that song. I do.
I like the Vsauce meta narrative of it. Of, isn't it ironic that she doesn't know anything about the irony? And then it's like, oh my god, light bulb moment. And Ed Byrne did a good.
Isn't ironic? She doesn't know irony. No, that doesn't work.
Yeah, but So I think when it comes to arguments, this is Dave's top tip. Kind of forget what the content is. Just do it algebraically. Just say, okay, if P, so whatever this proposition is, then Q. So if something is the case, then this is the consequent. Then you have to go, okay, is that reasonable? Is there a connection there? So, for example, if you say, if God exists, then every day we should expect to see a brand new bunch of bananas on my doorstep when I open the door. Is that reasonable to accept? And you go, either yes or no, depending on whether you think it is. And then you go into, or if it's a modus tollens, then you do the same thing, but with nots in there. So with an argument, the first thing I do is break it down to say, what is it trying to, what's the start point, what's the end point? Does it get there? And the way I think of it is, if has anyone played the game Tubes, you start off with you try and get all the pipes lined up so the water flows from the start to the end, and you've got to spin them all around. It's like a kind of like a Tetris kind of spinning them around. Will the water get from where it starts to where it ends? Everyone will be playing it now because it's an awesome game. And so that's what validity is. Does it start and end? And does it go from the start to the end? Have you got them all lined up so they go out? And then the argument is then sound. If you go, are the premises actually true? Or at least more plausible than their negation? For example, can we actually prove logically that all men are mortal? I would say, strictly speaking, probably no. We can just have massive inductive support from medical, biological evidence, etc. But we can go, okay, it's much more plausible that all men are mortal, or a specific, and so Socrates is mortal. And then finally you've got to say, okay, it may be a sound argument, so it might be valid and the premises are true, but is it convincing? And that's very much a personal thing. That's very much what convinces you and whether your philosophical assumptions sort of lend to it. And this is where I think my biggest issue, and if I do have a debate with any apologist, I wouldn't necessarily challenge their arguments. I challenge the notion of bringing arguments to prove something to be the case, and what I call the epistemic problem of deduction. You have the problem of induction, you have the problem of deduction. There is a problem with deduction. You can't justify deduction other than using deduction, in which case it's circular, and you can't use induction because it's not strong enough. So there's a problem of deduction, but then you have an epistemic problem of deduction of, well, you should only be convinced by a deductive argument if you're kind of already convinced by the argument. So if I say, Steve, have you read any of Samuel Clemens' work? And if you say no, I don't, possibly you will. I say, okay, so Steve, have you read any of Mark Twain's work? And you go, yeah, I've read all of Mark Twain's work. I love him. And I can't say...
It's an instantiation problem, actually.
Well, yeah, okay. Yeah, you're holding my feet to the fire, which is... I hate when people do it to me. It's only when I do it.
I've learned from you, man. You're the biggest pendant I know, so...
The student has become a master, I seem.
I know what instantiation is. Yeah, wow. Okay.
In the same way, if I say, I can't at the moment, but usually I can see the evening star, and then I can't then say I've never seen Venus, for example. So they're referring to the same thing.
Yes.
So you can't say I've never seen the evening star, but I have seen Venus. So that's what deductive arguments do. They say the conclusion is already somewhere in the premises. You just have to sort of flesh it out. You just have to tease it out from the laws of, all the applications of the laws of whichever system of logic you're using. So yeah, the epistemic problem of deduction is tied into the problem of deduction of
absolutely.
The conclusion is already in there. It's just then teasing it out. So how can apologists ever expect to convince non-theists when we hold antagonistic philosophical assumptions? So the reason why I don't buy the Kalam, for a number of reasons, but the main one is I don't buy the notion of efficient without material.
We'll have to save that for another time.
Yeah,
that's a whole different argument.
That is a whole different argument.
Yeah, I agree with you. And by the way, the thing about deductive arguments is that, by the way, I'm getting a little feedback.
I will turn my microphone off.
A lot of feedback, actually. You never learn anything new from a deductive. Deductive argument only works with what you know and just susses out something from it, right? Only you learn something from an inductive argument. But we knew something new. We got some super chat questions, and I don't want to keep you too much longer because I know we only said they're going to do it for an hour. Jay Kershaw asked, what does Dave think about Carrier's myth theory? So what do you think about his Bayesian analysis of mythicism?
So I've read his book. It's incredibly well written. It's incredibly well researched. I don't disagree with a lot of it. I don't, particularly when it comes to the background evidence of. At the end of the day, I think I'm not a mythicist, but then again, I'm probably very, very, very strongly agnostic about can we know anything about this period. And so a book that really inspired me is called, let me get this right, Reaction and Allegory. The Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark is Reaction and Allegory by, I think it's R.G. Price. There's a great synopsis, which I will find. But R.G. Price, Gospel of Mark, you will find it. And there's a little blog, not like a little article as well that supplements it, which goes through, if Mark is our early source, he's canonizing Paul. So basically he's narrativizing Paul's letters. He's trying to make a story out of it. And all the instances in Jesus' life can either be traced back to Paul's sort of teachings, which kind of he then creates a story based on it. Like, I'm trying to think one off the top of my head, but yeah, he creates stories, and it's amazing how he says he's a teacher, but then doesn't relay any teachings, which is very peculiar. And then you have, for instance, people always say the principle of embarrassment when it comes to John the Baptizer, or John the Baptist as people know him. Why would they include him? But when you actually include the reference to him, he's described exactly in the same way that Elijah is. And Elijah is meant to preempt the coming of the Messiah. Elijah, if you've read Micah, the prophet Micah, it says Elijah will prepare the way for the coming of the Messiah, essentially. And so when, and I can't remember the other thing, but John the Baptizer is wearing the same thing. So he's creating these details to furnish a theological allegory. Then when you realize Matthew and Luke are, if not entirely, virtually, dependent upon Mark as a source. John is just batshit crazy, and I think John will.
Oh, did you dropped out?
Theological allegory.
You dropped out there. You want to repeat that last sentence? Completely dropped out.
Sorry. So if Mark is a theological allegory, and Matthew and Luke and John to some extent are based on Mark, how much can we actually know about if there was a historical Jesus? So do I buy Carrier's analysis about Jesus being a pre-existent special being? It's possible. There were weird and wonderful things being believed at the time, not just about his nature. You have the Gnostics who believe that during his crucifixion there was Jesus looking down on him, and Jesus was watching himself being crucified, and all weird and wonderful things like that. It was possibly a branch. You do have things like 2 Peter, which falsifies the notion of, oh no, we were eyewitnesses to His Majesty. We couldn't have been following cleverly devised tales. Why would they be saying that unless there were people who believe that? So I would say I'd probably describe myself as an agnostic when it comes to historicity. That we can't know what if or what. There's a great book actually, which is a slight tangent, but about the resurrection. How little we actually know about the resurrection. We don't have minimal facts when it comes to resurrection. It's It's called A Resurrection, A Critical Inquiry by Michael Atler, I think. Atler, something like that. It's 800 odd pages, basically going through everything wrong with those 3 days when it comes to Jesus being put to trial, with the prophecies that are related to it, whether he was crucified on a Friday or a Thursday or Wednesday, what year it was, we don't know. And if that's the most important moment, if that's what Paul talks most about as being the earliest source, as well as the Gospels obviously painting that as the most important thing. For me, there are two possibilities. It was entirely, basically, I think the two possibilities are the movement associated with James. Now, people think Peter is like the second founder of Christianity, or the second most important of the Jerusalem, I say church, but it was actually synagogue. They were all Jewish, people at the time. So I think it was either James, the brother of Jesus, who was leader of the Jerusalem movement. So if there was a historical Jesus, his movement for 10 times longer than Jesus of Nazareth. Let's not forget that. He did it for 30 years. Jesus only did it for probably about 3. So for 30 years, until his death in 60 something, depending on what dating you use, he was the leader of that movement, of the Jewish Torah observing movement that was incredibly important. Paul then had his own movement. He was going around the world to Corinth and to Philippi and to Rome and establishing these churches, apart from Rome, which he didn't establish, but that's by the by. So he was establishing these churches based on his own revelation, his own experience. When you realize that, you go, well, he's a Johnny-come-lately. He didn't meet any of the earthly apostles until years after his experience. And by that time, he'd already started preaching and setting up these churches. And then you get into, well, how much historical information can we get from these sources when they're just written so late by anonymous authors? And then you get into the sort of the very simple argument. So the two options are Jesus was placed into history on the back of James's movement. So James had this really important movement. They placed him as the brother of Jesus, hence why they put that into the Josephus account, that he was the brother of that James is the brother of Jesus. So he added who was the Christ. That would make sense if they're trying to place him into history, or there was a historical Yeshua, Joshua character, or an amalgamation of several people. I don't know. At the end of the day, I do not know. I'm at this position now where I think we can know virtually nothing about if there was a historical Jesus, even if he existed. It's possible he was euhemerized, to use Carrier's term, that he was placed into history. And I think it's perfectly plausible that he was placed into history with an existing movement that was Torah observing, who were basically Jewish. And then Paul basically just had them over the barrel when there was a famine. And so they had to prop up the movement. And he was like, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I'll carry on doing what you're doing. You carry on what you're doing. And basically Paul's version won out. And so we have a Pauline version of Christianity, whereas Jesus Torah observing, that don't break the Torah, whereas Paul's like, fuck the Torah, let's just, be Gentiles and everyone's welcome. So, yeah, long answer short, I don't know. I don't know.
I get that, but I mean, Carrier's not out to lunch on this, right? I mean, I haven't liked Carrier. I mean, he's always been great to me. I'm not a mythicist, right? I'm more of agnostic on it than that. I'd probably say that I think that Jesus probably in some way, some kernel of truth existed. But I mean, he only has a 2/3 probability that he didn't, and I don't think that's enough to convince somebody. I don't think that you should form a belief just on 66% against or whatever it is. So that's just me. But I mean, I think he does his research. I think he's well written. I don't read much by him except for his blogs, but I like his blogs a lot. I don't read his books, but I mean, I know he has an ongoing war with Tim O'Neill. Tim O'Neill thinks that Richard Carrier is like just absolutely bonkers and full of shit and not scholarly. And it's funny because Richard thinks the same thing about Tim. So yeah. I don't know. I kind of like them both. So, but I don't see anything wrong with Richard's methodology. I just don't necessarily agree with his conclusions because I just don't think they're convincing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think basically the bottom line is read everything you can. Read these books. And I agree with Carrier that I don't think there is an equivalent scholarly. There's too much assumptions in Bart Ehrman's, and so Raphael the Casters is another one that's well worth a read for the mythicist position. Read as much as you can and come to your own conclusion. You'll go, actually, this is the position I'm at of, I'm not necessarily convinced by mythicism, but I'm enough convinced that we don't know what we think we know about Jesus, whereas we do know about Julius Caesar and characters from a very similar time frame because of the not just the sources we have, but the type of sources they have. I mentioned before we went live, but I'm actually writing a book at the moment, and I have, I think, 16 or 17 objections to the minimal fact approach. These aren't non-negotiable facts about, for example, that's the resurrection, but these aren't non-negotiable facts that, oh, every single scholar thinks this, this, and this. Because even scholars who agree with some of these facts, don't necessarily hold them to be facts. So, for example, Dale Allison says, okay, on probability, the tomb was probably empty. That is a far cry of him saying, oh, it's an absolute fact that the tomb was empty. He's very lucid when it comes to it's all probabilistic. So when you say these are non-negotiable facts, so if you have 12 facts that Jesus was born when he was, etc., they're not non-negotiable. So read as much as you can about this and come to your own conclusion. I can't tell you, this isn't a shortcut saying whatever Dave thinks, we'll think that. For me, it's still an intense struggle. Doing my book at the moment, going, well, if I had a time machine 2,000 years ago, we could solve this very easily. Unfortunately, we don't have that. What we have is sources that were written by people with their own theological agendas, who had their own assumptions, who had their philosophical baggage to contend with. They were writing in a social climate. They had these socio-political constraints, these theological issues going on. It was a very turbulent time. It wasn't easy to be Jewish back then. All these issues sort of conspire into this massive ball of confusion of going, okay, we can't just settle this by saying, let's get in a time machine, go back to the year 30 and see what was happening. What we have to do is rely on, it's how much do you trust the Gospels and the New Testament writings and the extra stuff that kind of comes a bit later. How much of those is actually accurate? And for me, from kind of my psychology background, is I trust everything with very, very high skepticism, because people lie, people make shit up, people embellish stuff, people add details that didn't happen, people, in the case of the Gospels, they write prophecies that didn't even appear and made up narratives that aren't historical, like the saints walking through, coming out of their graves and wandering through Jerusalem. Like even Christian, like Michael O'Connor was fired from his position, or resigned, I think it was, because he felt that was maybe an allegory. So even Christians, and he's probably, if you want to read possibly the best case for the resurrection, Michael O'Connor's work. If you want to read the best case against the resurrection, either read Michael Atler's or wait for my book to come out, which will be coming out once I've written it, which is going to be at some point in the future. Because I do want to do a tour de force.
People are like, oh, people are asking what's going on. I was just talking to some guy. I'm like, no, I'm talking to Dave freaking S, baby. The king of Christian counter apologetics.
And
back and ready to go to town. So if you're ready to debate him, people, he was looking for opponents, and he's going to start off lightweight, like, I don't know, Matt Slick maybe, but then we're going to get up to William Lane Craig. That's my goal, is get you to William Lane Craig.
Absolutely.
I know you would stomp him to the ground, but there's no reason why he wouldn't debate you. I mean, you're on his level, I think. I mean, you're obviously, I think, more than his level, but
he's not fit to shine my shoes. Come on, let's be honest.
Exactly. Here. He could spit on your shoes maybe, and
possibly, yeah.
Shine him, but so I'm trying to think. How much longer do you think you got? Because I know I'm keeping you longer than expected. This is fun.
If there's a quick question out there, like a 60-second or 10-second question.
I'll get a question for you. Will you be Shannon Q's best friend?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
As long as she'll be mine as well.
Oh yeah, I think she will. Yeah. She. You know what? I don't recommend people unless I know them. I know, and I've read their stuff or read their, watch the videos, or I know their arguments. And yours has always been spot on. So I cannot recommend to people more than to go to his channel and subscribe to him and follow him on Twitter. The links are in the video description, because he's going to be exceptional coming up here, because he's going to be doing more shit finally. And I think that you're going to see a lot of him just wrecking people left and right. Because for example, like SJ. Wouldn't you love to have a conversation with SJ?
That's another hour and a half of what's going on there. But yeah, so all joking aside, I know I was being a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but probably not as much as people think. If anyone does want to discuss or debate anything with me, I am open. I will try and do my best to accommodate. But also, I do appreciate moderators as well, so Steve or Shannon or whoever, because I don't want it to seem like I'm not Andrew Rappaport, I'm not Matt Slick. I'm not saying you have to come into my lair and play by my rules. I'm happy to debate, discuss with other people. And yeah, I think I'm going to start off with picking up some of the lowest hanging fruit. So if Matt Slick is listening, or if this gets to Matt Slick, you've been formally challenged by Dave S.
I'll bring it to his attention now. I mean, Matt was supposed to have a part 2 with Alex, but I think he's running scared because what happened was Matt Slick had said that Alex did not only not disconfirm the tag argument that he had, but actually the way he argued it, he confirmed the tag. And I was like, what?
Oh, yeah.
Matt, what? And I told Alex this, and he's like, where did he say this? And I showed him on Facebook, and he's like, oh, really, Matt? You want to talk about this? And Matt Slick ran. And I happen to like Matt. I'm not going to lie. I like Matt Slick. I mean, personally, as far as if you don't talk about God, you don't talk about any of the religiosity, he's not a bad guy. He's just dishonest as fuck. But staying away from that kind of stuff, he's actually kind of funny. But that's the problem. You get into the religiosity kind of thing, and it just changes his whole personality into this really just dishonest person, as we've seen from Andrew Rappaport, who's just been one dishonest thing after another. I can't. Oh, by the way, he says I blocked him on Twitter now. Believe it or not.
Oh, I did see before we came live.
He's outright lied and said I blocked him on Twitter. And by the way, I have screenshots of everything, and we're gonna be exposing him on Sunday on Non-Secular Show. It's gonna be brilliant. It's gonna be glorious.
I'm so excited for that. Well, yeah, and also just to give myself a shout out as well, like you say, with follow me on Twitter. I am hilarious on Twitter. So if you want to see
don't go crazy.
More of this and more, for example, I can't remember the exact quote, but I said I was challenging Andrew Rappaport to critique my 27,000 word response to the tag. And I said something along the lines of, if you can crawl out of Matt Slick's arse for a second and respond to it, that would be great. So if you want to hear more of me talking like that, swearing like a sailor, and seeing the real me, because I hope the real me does come across in these hangouts, because I know videos, it's a little bit robotic. If you want to see me being me and shooting the shit with people, follow me on Twitter, read my blog, which is dmspence.com, or subscribe to Dave S.
Well, there you go, people. We're going to wrap it up. Sorry it can't be longer today, but we're going to get Dave back. And I like the fact that he can come on during the daytime here for us. It's nighttime for him. So if you got any questions, leave them in the comment, or just message me directly for him, and I'll get it to him. And if you know somebody that you want him to debate, let's make it happen. It doesn't have to be on my channel or Non Sequitur. I don't care. I just want to listen to Dave S. come back and go to town on somebody. So with that, thank you guys for watching this. Go subscribe to his channel in the video description. He's got stuff coming out. He's got a book he's going to finally finish one of these days. And go follow him on Twitter. Good night.
Yeah. Watch this space. Thank you very much.